I will be talking about learning language in the first years of life. So to start, I will just tell you a little bit about where I come from. I work at the University of Western Sydney, where I lead the Babylove, which is a research facility where we study language and cognitive development in young babies and children. My background is in psychology, but also in linguistics. So, language. Language is one of the most complex systems that a human being can learn. No other species can master language, and so far we have not been able to build a machine or a computer that could learn language the way we do. However, our babies come to the world and master this complicated system in just a couple of years, and they seem to do it effortlessly and very easily. So what puzzles us is how do they do it? How do they master the system? And that's what we study. But we also look at what can we do as parents, and also what can practitioners do to facilitate this task for children and make sure that they acquire language healthily and successfully. So in today's talk, I will go over some of the major tasks that infants need to accomplish to learn language, which are learning the sounds of their language, also learning the words of their language. And then I will talk a little bit about the type of language that they listen in the first years of life. Babies start listening to language much earlier before they come to the world. They can listen to sounds when they are in the mom's bump. So around the second trimester, where the auditory system develops, babies start perceiving the sounds around them. The sound that they hear the most is their mother's speech, because our voice travels through our bones that work as a conductor, so our babies can hear us quite well. Of course, they do not hear speech the way you are hearing me speak right now. Their version is more low-pass filtered version of speech. And to imagine the way it sounds, for example, if you're in a bathtub or in a pool and you go underwater and music is playing on the background and somebody is speaking, that mumbled version, that's what babies can listen to. But we know that they're not actually just passively hearing all these sounds. They're actually listening to what's happening around them in the outside world. Some of our research has shown that babies can recognize the different sounds that they listen to in utero. An interesting study done around 20 years ago now asked moms who were pregnant in their last trimester to read for stories to their babies. The same story for several days, over and over again. Then she was invited to come into the lab, and she was asked to read to the same story and to a different story, while the researchers were monitoring the heart rate of the baby. The heart rate of the baby sped up when mom was reading the story that she was reading before, but it didn't speed up when she was reading a new story, meaning that the baby was able to recognize the different words and intonational patterns in the story that the mom was reading. This information that the babies are learning even before they are born give them very important tools for learning language when they come to the world. So in the first days of life, babies already show very remarkable abilities. They can distinguish the rhythmical pattern of the language. So for example, a baby born to a family that speaks English can tell the difference between English and a different language such as Japanese or Spanish. The baby also has a strong preference for their mother's voice. So if you play the mother's voice as opposed to a voice of a different female to a baby, the baby recognizes it, and the way we measure it is also with the baby's heart rate. The heart rate speeds up when mom is speaking. And they also prefer the kind of speech that we direct to babies, what we call infant-directed speech, which is that soothing and melodical type of speech that we naturally adopt with babies. Now, the baby comes to the world, and everybody's speaking language around him or her. Now the difficult task begins. So first of all, they need to figure out what are the sounds of language. Languages are composed of a variety of sounds, and some sound differences are relevant to one language, but are not relevant to a different one. So for example, when I say bet and vet, I'm saying two different words in English. But if I say those words to a Spanish speaker, they will not hear the difference because this contrast is not relevant for them. Same, for example, in Mandarin or in Thai, the words ma and ma are completely different words. Whereas if I say it in English, I'm saying the same word just with different intonation. When our babies are born, when they come to the world, they can tell the difference between all the contrasts of all the sounds of all the languages in the world. And in the first 9 months of their life, they need to figure out which sounds are relevant for the language that they are learning to. They do it naturally, and the way they figure it out is just by listening to mom and dad and grandpa and grandma and all the people around them speaking, and they figure out which sounds are actually making the difference. Now, the babies figured out the sounds, but that's just the first step of the learning process, because then we need to find what are words. If you've ever listened to a foreign language, you've probably noticed that it all sounds like one string, and you can't tell where one word begins and one word ends. And that's exactly the way babies hear us. It just all sounds like a one string of speech. And what I have on this quite difficult slide is just to illustrate this is how speech looks like, and as you can see, there are no obvious divisions between words, so it all sounds like one string. So how do babies figure out where words begin and words end? Now, believe it or not, they have the ability to track statistics in speech. That's one of the most fascinating abilities that babies have. So what they do is they listen to speech. So for example, we have a phrase, "You're such a pretty baby, you're so pretty. Isn't mommy's baby so cute? My baby's just so pretty." So let's look at how the baby can figure out the words pretty and baby. So when we look at the probabilities, there is a 100% chance that T follows pre in pretty. But there is only 33% chance that T is followed by B. And again, B always follows B. So the babies learn which is the most probable syllable to follow the first one, and that way they can figure out which is a word and which is a boundary between two words. It looks complicated, but your 3 or your 4-month-old is already doing it quite effortlessly. We've figured out what words are, we've figured out what sounds are. But now, how do we learn what words refer to? Because obviously we're listening to hundreds and hundreds of words around us, and we need to figure out what they mean. And this is a very challenging task, because even though as parents we quite often make a special effort to teach words to our babies, we don't actually do it as often. Sometimes we will say, "Oh, there's a dog, look, there's a dog." But most of the time we are going to be just talking about generic scenes around us. So for example, a mom is feeding a baby and she's saying, "Oh, look, the spoon, and there are beans in the spoon, and I'm going to give you the spoon." But the baby doesn't know that the spoon refers to that object that the mom is holding. It could refer to the food in it, it could refer to the glass standing next to her, it could refer to absolutely anything. So how do babies actually figure out what does spoon stand for? Again, statistics. In our lab, we run a series of studies that are called cross-situational word learning in order to see how babies do this. And what we do is, in a learning phase, we present babies with pairs of objects without any further information. And when babies look at them, they listen to different words. So for example, when they see these two, they hear dit and bon. When they see these two, they hear dut and dit. When they see these two, they hear bon and pon. So by now, you probably have figured out that this one is likely to be called bon, right? So babies have the ability to do this as well. We test this with babies around 15 and 17 months of age, and they show that they're successful at doing this task. Now, we usually assume that babies don't know many words until they start actually saying them. And babies start saying their first words around the age of 12 months or so, but the developmental curve depends on each baby, of course. However, babies know words much, much before that. We know that around 4 months of age or so, babies can already recognize the words that they hear the most, which are the words mommy, daddy, and their own name. By around 12 months of age, they can already understand about 80 words or so, so they know the words for most of the common objects around them. By 16 to 17 months, they start already saying their first words, and they can say around 50 words, which is quite remarkable for such a young baby. And at 18 months of age, a phenomenon happens that we call vocabulary explosion. So what happens is that from saying those 50 words a day, a baby starts learning up to 10 new words per day. So their vocabulary can increase to 300 or 400 in just a couple of months. And parents notice it because their baby goes from just saying isolate words, it starts producing words in phrases and using much more richer vocabulary. What we did in our lab is we looked at language development in 1,500 babies growing up in Australia from the ages of 12 to 30 months of age. And we were interested to look at how many words can a baby say at the different ages. And what we found is, as I showed in the last slide, as you can see in the middle line, a baby's vocabulary starts quite low. At around 18 months, we reach 50 words. And then we go through a huge increase, and by 30 months we're saying over 400 words. But what I wanted to demonstrate here is that we also see these additional lines. In the middle, we have the average of all babies, but we also have babies who are on the top of the distribution and babies who are on the bottom of the distribution. And as you can see, the difference between them is very, very large. So at 30 months, we can have babies who are saying around 200 words, but we also have babies who are saying over 500 words. And what is important to know is that this is completely natural variability. It's a natural aspect about development. Some babies will say more words, others won't. And if you have older children or if you've been around kids, you'll know that parents talk about this in the playground, for instance, and they say things like, oh, my youngest ones was speaking so much more at this age. And that's completely natural, and there is nothing to be concerned about. Later, all the babies who were later talkers or who were faster in acquiring language tend to catch up by around 3 or 4 years of age. That's why usually when babies are directed to therapy, it tends to be much later on, so around the age of 3, because at this age, because of this large variability, we can't really tell. So it's completely normal if your baby is saying fewer words than other babies of the same age. Now, we've been talking about the fact that babies learn language from listening to what's happening around them. And babies are usually exposed to one specific type of speech. We call it infant-directed speech in research, but sometimes we refer to it as baby talk. It's also called motherese. And even though some parents sometimes say, well, I don't know if I do it, but we've seen in our research that we all do it naturally. We all adopt this soothing, warm way of speaking to our babies. And you've heard it, you've probably done it as well. What many people don't know and what we've been looking for in our research is that we've looked at the characteristics of that speech. And what we have found is that it's not actually just a cute way of addressing babies or of showing them our love and affection, but actually it works as a very effective technique to help them learn language. So unconsciously, parents are giving babies the most optimal form of linguistic input to help them acquire language healthily and successfully. So infant-directed speech can help us in language development, but also in developing emotional and social skills. You could say, well, I also speak in a similar way to my puppy, oh, hello, good boy, and it all sounds similar. And we actually did a study on this in our lab. We invited moms to come to the lab, moms who had a baby and who also had a pet, a cat or a dog, and we recorded her speech when she was talking to her baby and when she was talking to her pet. And then we analyzed the speech to look at her intonational patterns or pitch. We also looked at the amount of affect in her speech, and we also conducted a more detailed acoustic analysis of the sounds of language that she was producing. What we found is that, yes, the intonation and affect were quite similar in the speech to the baby and to the pet. They were much higher than when the mom was speaking to another adult. However, the mom was changing the sounds of her language only when she was speaking to her baby. What she was doing is expanding each sound that she was saying to make it sound clearer. And she was not doing that when she was talking to the pet. So what's important here is that we are showing in our research that unconsciously we're trying to make our speech clearer to help our babies learn those sounds and then to become able to produce the same sounds later on. When we look at the affect in our speech, we also find something quite fascinating. We recorded speech of moms who were speaking to their 3-month-old and newborn babies. We also recorded them when they were speaking to 6 and 9-month-olds. And then we analyzed the affective patterns. What we found is that moms who were speaking to younger babies sounded more comforting and soothing. Moms who were speaking to 6-month-olds sounded like they were encouraging attention in their baby, whereas moms who were speaking to 9-month-olds sounded like they wanted to direct the baby's attention. We found this interesting, and what we did next is that we took those recordings and we played them to babies to see what do babies prefer. And guess what? 3-month-olds preferred comforting speech over all different other attention sounds. 6-month-olds preferred speech that was encouraging attention, and 9-month-olds preferred speech that was directing their behavior. So what we're showing in this study is that somehow, completely unconsciously, we give our babies what they want and what they need at that age, or they are asking us to give them what they want and what they need. But we have this close interaction with our baby where we are facilitating their language development. Now, you're probably thinking, well, you're telling me to speak to my baby. That's quite obvious. I don't really need advice to do that. But actually, what we're finding in our research is that families vary a lot in the amount of speech that they direct to their babies. What I'm showing here on this graph is the amount of infant-directed speech that different families with 19-month-old babies were directing to their baby. The dark graph is the one that shows the amount of speech to the baby. So here we have a family that was producing about 10 to 20 words to their baby, whereas here we have a family that was producing over 10,000 words to the baby. And we have all these families in between. So as you can see, there is a huge variation in the way families speak to their babies. So for example, in some cases, parents would say things like, oh, look, there is a teddy, play with the teddy. Whereas in other families, the mom would say, oh, look, there is a teddy. The teddy is brown. It's brown like this other brown ball, and etc., and etc., and etc. What's the most interesting finding of this study is that the amount of speech that the moms were using was directly related to the size of the vocabulary that their babies developed later on in life at 24 months. What I'm showing here is that the moms who spoke less to their babies had babies with smaller vocabularies, whereas the mom who spoke more with their babies had babies with larger vocabularies. So the type of speech and the amount of speech that we direct to our young bubs is fundamental in their language development. I've walked you through the development of language in the first years of life, but now I want to tell you a little bit about how we find out all this important information. So I come from the University of Western Sydney Baby Lab, and that's where we do our infancy research. So we conduct a variety of studies to look at how we talk to babies, how babies listen to language, how babies learn about the world, and also how babies with different experiences acquire language. And by different experiences, we mean babies who, for example, are learning 2 languages instead of 1, or babies who have risk for developing a developmental or sensory disorder like hearing impairment or dyslexia or autism. We are not the only baby lab in Sydney. In fact, we have 4 baby labs in different locations. UWS has one in Kingswood and one in Beckstown, but also our colleagues at UNSW, University of New South Wales, have a baby lab, as well as Macquarie University. And here today we have representatives from all the labs if you would like to approach us. And the way this works is that we invite moms and dads with little babies to come and sign up with us and provide us with your information. What happens is whenever a study comes up for the age of the baby, of your baby, we give you a call and we explain what the study is about, and we invite you for a visit to our lab. All our studies are very simple, so most of them involve you sitting in front of a TV with your baby. The baby sits on your lap, and we play sounds to the baby, and we record how the baby listens to the sounds. And at the end of the visit, you usually receive a Babylove certificate. The baby also gets a little token, like a gift or maybe a little T-shirt, and we also reimburse you for your travel. And today we are located in stand B34 if you would like to come and have a chat to us and learn more about what we do. And I would also like to invite you to like us on Facebook or to visit our website if you want to learn a little bit more about our information or to ask questions about your baby's language development. Thank you so much for listening.